Over Grades podcast, it is a catchy song, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces EDU community. I'm your host, Melody McAllister, educator advocate for Spaces EDU, your solution for digital documentation and assessment of students learning for all. In this episode, I talk with a dear friend who is a globally recognized educator and leader. Yaritza Villalba has been a teacher and administrator in public education. She has written and published books, and she's always sharing lessons she makes in connecting with students and teachers internationally. Whether it is high tech or low tech, she knows how to reach students. I respect the way she is constantly growing and how she always shares what she creates in bringing so many people along. Her creative streak is phenomenal. She came to our Spaces EDU booth this past spring at IdeaCon for an author signing. Everyone she talked and shared with left with her book, Mackenzie's Time Machine, and a huge smile on their face. I imagine they took her children's book and the joy that she infused in them back to their respective school communities. Honestly, that's just not something you see every day. Yaritza, it's such an honor to have you on the Growth Over Grades podcast. Before we get started, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey in education?
That intro, I love that intro. Thank you, Melody.
It's true.
I love it. Hello, everyone. My name is Yaritza Villalba. Prior to being a consultant, I was an educator for 12 years. I taught high school students social studies, AP US history, and Regents Prep. Those of you who are from New York, you know we take standardized tests. They're called Regents. Then later, I became an assistant principal of an expeditionary learning school. And then after that, I became a full-time DI consultant on one of the companies that I still consult with is Microsoft Flip, and my focus is cultural and linguistic diversity. But in everything that I do, I'm still constantly reflecting on who I was as an educator and how can I bring those skills and practices into my daily practices and planning as a consultant.
I love that so much. And, the title of our show today is Leadership, Bringing Out the Best in Our Students. So I want to talk about, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, y'all. But the first thing I want to ask you, Jaritza, is what is something that leaders can do to bring out the best in their students? And I'm not just talking about administrators. You've served both. You've been a teacher in the classroom and an administrator. How can anyone that is trying to bring out creativity and the best, what can we do to help our students?
So first is to honestly just be transparent about who you are. And then that way you can just debunk all of these myths of how students learn best. And then you can get to know your students. So although I was a history teacher, for 6 years, I became what we call in New York a peer collaborative teacher or a master teacher. And my job was to go into other classes to really figure out what the problem of practice was for those educators and to find ways in which we can really help every student learn. So the idea was if they're in my class and they're analyzing documents, they're trying to figure out what these graphs are stating. They're literally analyzing graphs and bar graphs and researching history. Then how can we take those skills and apply it in a science class or even in a math class? And that's how we began to create interdisciplinary planning. But with that, that's all leadership, right? Taking a stance, saying, hey, we have this problem. We have to find out what the core issue is, the underlying issue, and then how can we resolve it? The only way that you can really resolve issues that are centered on students is by really figuring out what is it that the students want. And it may not be something physical, right? Some of our students, yes, we know that they learn best when they're coming into your classroom without many of the issues that they're dealing with at home, whether if it's hunger, whether if it's lack of sleep. But then we know other students need a little bit more kind of like warm hugs, right? And those warm hugs may be in a sense of supplying multiple entry points for them to actually engage into your lesson plan. If I know that a student is not at the grade level in which they should be in order to understand this text, then maybe I may want to chunk the text for the student. That way he or she doesn't feel like a failure when they're reading this text that, is above their grade level. And that's to me a warm hug, not really physical, right? But just in how do we understand how to best meet the needs of our students without having them feel like they're standing out because they need added support.
Gosh, I that is amazing. Was that something that you felt was natural for you as an educator, or did you learn that over time, like that skill set?
So it was natural. All of my life, I was an ESL student. So sitting in those classes, even when I knew I didn't need those classes, was almost like well, one, I disliked it. right? Because I knew I didn't belong there. I was actually predominant and more efficient in speaking, proficient in speaking the English language, and I wasn't speaking Spanish. But because my mom never signed me out of ESL, as the years progressed, they always gave me those classes. But what I got to see was just how the teachers met the needs of those students who had just came to the United States, whether if it was giving them books that helped with phonics or comprehension, whether if it was giving them dictionaries and placed those dictionaries on a desk and said, whenever you find a word that you need help with, before you raise your hand, try to find it for yourself, right? So creating that independence. And so when I became a teacher, I had overage unaccredited students. So I was 21 teaching 21-year-olds. And the first thing that comes to your mind is the system has already failed these students, right?
Mm-hmm.
System has already put these students in a position where they feel like whatever resources we give them, whatever conversations we have with them is not enough. And so me being a teacher, I was like, I can't use this same stuff. It didn't work. It didn't work the past 8 years that they were in high school, right? Normally it's 4 years. So if it didn't work the past 8 years, why would I come here and give you the same exact text, same exact curriculum, which we know colonized text, right? That we know is just going to go over your head, or you're going to look at it, you're going to remember the fact that someone already introduced it to you, and you're just going to toss it and throw it away because it's not relevant to who you are as a student. And so I had to really rethink and reimagine what learning looks like. And what that means is I had to ask the students, what do you want to do? And whatever it was that they said they wanted to do, I knew I had to integrate it with the skill set that they needed in order to become successful as learners, but also the skill sets that they needed to become successful as young adults. So it wasn't just about U.S. history. It wasn't just about teaching history or analyzing documents. It was, what am I going to teach you today that's not content heavy or content based, that's going to allow you to flourish in a career beyond what we're doing here? And some of my students already had jobs. Some of my students were working at Target. Some of my students were working at Amazon. Some of my students didn't have time to even come to first period because of the fact that they worked that night. So it was, how do we really reimagine what learning looks like so that you can embrace the fact that I'm teaching you content that, yes, you've heard before, but I'm doing so in a way where it's totally different and it's relative and literally relevant to who you are as an individual, which takes time, right?
Right.
And I mean, what students want takes time. And I think that's what really teachers and leaders, teacher leaders, that's what stumps us, because we know if I really have to prep for every individual student, and if I have 34 students in a class and I have to teach 5 classes a day, that's over 100 students that I'm prepping for. That's difficult.
For sure. And one thing that resonates with me about what you're saying is that, like, it seems like a simple step, but it's not, because I know that we both know that that's not a question that is usually asked in classes, regardless of whatever grade level it is. But also the impact of doing something that seems simple, the impact of that is so great. Yeah. And like you just said, well, that's the puzzle piece that is missing in so many lessons today, and so many whatever, just like all is that relevancy piece, and that, hey, this is for you. This, how, like, this is not just something that we're teaching because it's part of the curriculum, but this is something that is going to help you forever. And I thank you for addressing that. It's something that we can do today. The next time we go into the classroom, if we're trying to improve our lessons, we can ask our students that. And it is hard. So I just want to address that it's not something that's super easy. Like you said, it's a lot of prep. But do you feel like it gets easier and more natural over time?
Of course, because now you know your students. So you know that Xavier is going to want something that is interwoven with music. You know that Chelsea is going to ask you to give text, but in a way where it reads out like poetry. You know that Hymed is going to say, Miss, I really am not interested in reading text at all, but I would prefer for you to play a video for me. And so now you know that maybe my mini lesson, as opposed to me standing up and talking, I may want to play a video, right? And then if I am giving supporting text, I may want it to be a short poem. And that way you're hitting the needs of every student. But guess what? You're also providing multiple entry points. So you're really breaking down what the content is without you being at the center of it. Now the students learning, the students themselves, they are at the center and the core, and you can just sit back and just be that added support as you're rotating the classroom, or you're really just walking around to see, okay, who needs help with analyzing documents? Who needs help with sourcing documents?
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone need anything else beyond raising your hand and say, Miss, I love this activity, right? You're giving yourself that prep and that opportunity to really figure out what the needs are. Now I gave you everything you asked for. Let's
Yeah.
see what you can do with it. And it may
Yeah.
not be that the entire lesson is a video, because now it's can't teach that way, right? But you just
Mm-hmm.
showed a video clip that was 3 minutes. And so you made that one student, you made Jaime really happy to see that video, because whatever it was that you're going to say, he wasn't going to get it. He wasn't going to comprehend it coming from you, but he comprehended it because that video gave visual,
Mm-hmm.
and it's probably in a language that's more of his speed, right? So
Right.
sometimes kids get tired of hearing us speak.
Oh,
Sometimes
for sure.
they get tired of seeing us in the front, because although we know we're not lecturing, it seems like a lecture, but also it seems like, because they're sitting down and you're standing up, it seems like you are the only leader within that
Right.
classroom. And if you create that space or that relationship or that bond with students where they feel like it too is their classroom, and they're, saying, hey, I want to be the monitor for giving out devices. I want to be the monitor for the bathroom passes. Now you are creating a community within your classroom, and learners are more open to saying, Miss, that lesson didn't click because you didn't provide anything according to my learning style. And I know learning styles has been a huge topic. That's why I was like, should I even say learning style? But learning styles exist, right? Learning
Preferences for
styles
sure.
exist.
I agree with you. I agree
Yeah.
with you. I know what I
Yeah.
like. Yeah, and I was going to say, we're talking about leadership, and anybody in the classroom can be a leader. Not we're getting away from just administrators being
Yeah.
leaders. And then I was going to ask you, like, how do you know when you've made that impact, when you've been successful? But you answered it. It's when students rise up and become the leaders in
Yeah.
the classroom as well, and they are leading in their own education. And when you're talking about, high school or secondary level students, that's what you want to see. That's
Yeah.
like the golden goose right there. And I totally agree about learning preferences. I know that a lot of it's been debunked, but I prefer to hear things. I don't have to look at what I'm learning about, as long as I can hear it
Yeah.
and write down notes, and that's not how everybody, prefers to learn. So did you want to say anything else about that?
I was just thinking about, so like when I taught my students, especially like that last year of us going right back into the classroom after COVID, what I did was I chunked my units in a way where, yes, at the beginning of the unit, I introduced the topic. We did activities, we did formative assessments. And then at the end, we would do different reviews. One of those reviews was we would have a game day where I would do stations, and at every station there was different kinds of games. So if the topic was World War II, I literally went to Amazon, found a cardboard game that dealt with World War II. That would be one station. The next station would be Kahoot. Another station would be Digital Jeopardy. Another one, we had VR glasses in the classroom. So students would use those, where it puts them in the center of World War II in Europe.
Wow.
And then the other day would be for one of my students to become me. They will become the teacher, and they will lead their lesson depending on how they best seen it fit to summarize what we did for that entire week. And the takeaway from that was, you're not, as a teacher, raising your hand and saying, hey, no, that's wrong, don't say that. You're sitting back and you're watching the student reflect on their own learning, but also holding other students accountable for their learning. So they're choosing and they're picking, hey, answer this question. But you also get to see how students try to replicate exactly how you are as a teacher. So that's a reflective moment for you. I knew that when students would come into the class, I already had the do now up, and I would play music, and students would have 5 minutes not only to get settled, but to answer the do now question, which was always open-ended or in the form of a multiple choice. And so seeing students do that, and they would have their own music. I didn't help with anything, no prep, no nothing. It was their lesson plan. I would just be the person in the back just in case they needed support, or my students knew I had hot chocolate in the class because I had a Keurig or that, right? But you then get to reflect on, oh, maybe I need to do this differently, because now I'm noticing that students are coming in late, and because the 5 minutes is up, the do now is off the board. So they already missed that entry point into the lesson, right? Because you get to sit back and watch it as opposed to everyone watching you do it. So there's a lot of learning that can happen, especially when we create, this environment where students then become leaders. They then flourish and become independent as well.
I want to be in your classroom. Okay. I want to be that student. But I also, this makes me want to go right back to school and start implementing these things. I know that it's going to take a little bit of time to put some of these practice into place, but I feel like, that kind of work actually pays off in the end. So anybody who's listening and taking notes, like this is gold. Okay. This is golden. Um, when you get your students creating and they've got, all of these artifacts and everything, whatever, they may be digital, they may be like, hand, objects, like physical objects.
Mhm.
How important is it to have a digital portfolio, for your students? But also I wanted to ask you for teachers as well.
So I think it's 50-50. When I was in a classroom, and as I mentioned, I was teaching for 12 years. At the beginning, we had regular folders where you would just like
Mhm.
put every piece of paper. And then whenever I did digitally, would just stay on Google Classroom. I'll say it now. Google Classroom, or even if you're using Microsoft Teams or OneNote, those are digital portfolios, right? Wherever you can have a form of student work where students are able to go back to see their own progress and to assess
Mm-hmm.
their progress, to me, that's the definition of a digital portfolio. Those are important for students, right? Because it gives them kind of like ownership of, hey, go back and see what you're missing. I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of, don't come to me the week before grades are due to say, Miss, what do I have to do to pass your class?
Right.
Because my response is, go back to your portfolio, go back to your folder, and you see what you're missing. I used to have what I called a table of contents, where every time I gave an assignment, kids had to write in their portfolios what it was. So the date, the name of the assignment, and then had to put whether or not they turned it in. And then when I give it back, they had to put the grade. So accountability. I think that teachers definitely have to create digital portfolios. Education is always transforming. And with that being said, our content remains the same. The skill
Mm,
set that we teach is different because now careers are 70% of the careers in the United States, especially by 2024, are going to be mostly virtual, mostly in STEM. And we have to prepare our students for that. But the best way to do so is if we as educators truly understand the importance of it. I know a lot of educators, people I know personally, who this year have went back to pen and paper.
mm-hmm.
And I'm just surprised because I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, not only did you do all that work to fully understand the capabilities of these platforms and how they can really help students in reading comprehension, but also in helping with mathematics, which is a topic that a lot of students find difficult. But you basically said, let me unlearn all of those things and let me take it back to the traditional way of learning, which we know has always been an issue. We know
Mm-hmm.
that when, the first schools were built, the idea was to do so in a way where it's preparing students to enter factory jobs, factory
Right.
settings, which means everyone is learning the same exact thing. Everyone should learn at the same pace, and the end result should be the same. That way you can go and work in the factory. Things have changed. Students are
Right.
not leaving schools to go work in factories. They are leaving schools to work in large corporations, to make their own businesses. We have students now more than ever who are entrepreneurs, whether if it's having a hair salon, whether if it's becoming a barber or becoming a DJ. And so teachers have to best understand how to build out a digital portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
how to really go back and look at our resumes to see how it aligns with now, which is STEM based, which is how are you providing multiple ways for students to really engage with your lesson by embedding and integrating technology into it, but also giving students the opportunity to do so themselves. So for me, it's always a 50-50 because we know not every student is going to follow that journey of going to college where
Right.
portfolios are definitely necessary, or going into these large corporations. But students have to know how to put together a portfolio,
Right.
especially if I'm an entrepreneur and I need to walk into the bank and explain to them why they have to give me this $100,000 loan. Then I'm going to want to have that digital portfolio so I can say, these are all the things that I've accomplished. These are all the things that I have going on right now. And this is what I want my end result to be. But also, these are the numbers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And what you said, like, as teachers, as educators, to understand the importance of it, we must be doing it ourselves. And that it kind of, yeah, for people to go to pen and paper again, like that just seems a little bit wild to me as well, because it just seems bulky, honestly. Like I don't want to lug that around. And also, everything that we apply for is literally, digitally. So you're going to be, taking pictures of that and uploading it anyway. So that just seems kind of weird. But I agree with what you're saying. And our students, they're the career choices that they have were not the career choices that you're younger than me, but still they're so
Right.
different and varied compared to what we had when we were in school. And when you're talking about all of this, I love that you're bringing in elements of equity, and you are a DEI consultant. And for those people who are like, what does a DEI consultant do? I just want to ask you, what would you like to share about that? Because it's what you do the best, in everything.
Oh, thank you. So what I would say is we do it all. DEI is not a topic that is a standalone topic. It's embedded in everything that we do. So I create resources that are culturally responsive, that are and should be, I guess, experienced by a global network of educators and students. So when I create it, I have to really sit back and think, who is this for? How
Mhm.
is this going to be received in India as
Right.
opposed to Japan? How are students going to interact with it in Kenya as opposed to the United States? Australia, are they going to look at these words and say, this does not align with what we want our students to know? Or are they going to say, this is perfect for our standards? And so with DEI, you're really looking at the whole child or the whole community. It's how do I really create something that's reflective of every individual, but in a way where we're still putting that onus on the fact that we're still a community. And
Yeah.
so with DEI, this conversation is something that's dear to my heart because I'm always sharing with people that my mentor once told me there isn't an achievement gap, right? Because, everyone says there's achievement gap with Black and brown boys not learning at a faster pace or at the same rate and level as white boys. And the idea is it's not an achievement gap, it's an access gap, it's a
Mhm.
resource gap, it's an equity gap. When we
Right.
are creating resources, we don't really think about the communities that can't afford those resources. We don't think about the communities of students or educators who don't have access to those resources, whether it's here in the United States or in places like Africa or India, right? And so we have to really sit back and reflect on, if I create this lesson plan and I introduce this lesson plan to my students, are you going to have 100% of your students that are going to feel a connection? Or is there some people that are going to say, why am I reading this? This has nothing to do with my culture, has nothing to do with who I am. And it definitely doesn't have anything to do with my interests. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to have that student that says, why are we reading this? Why are we learning this? I don't need this after school. We're all educators. We've heard that line before. And it's not for us to take it personal. It's for you to go back home
Mm.
and figure out what that answer is. So if I'm discussing something about Pearl Harbor, maybe I want to really look into who my students are, what's their background, what's their cultures. And so when I teach Pearl Harbor, I'm not just going to say that, yes, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and in retaliation to save the United States and American lives, we then bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima. What I would say is, especially if my students are predominantly Black, I would say, what were African Americans doing during the time of war? How did this impact the lives of African American men and women? Were
Mhm.
there any African American men and women at this time who were impacted? How does that, because we know every war has a short impact and a long impact. How does this impact us long term?
Mhm.
Can
Right.
we say, can we look deeper into the resources that the military gives to African Americans? Has that transformed after that war? So I always tend to just look at things and say, what's my entry point? But also, how can I embed who my students are into this? And that's what DEI is. I work with companies that want me to create resources that speaks to the diverse perspectives around the world. And even companies that I work with who are right now just stationed in the United States and just doing work domestically, they want to know what's next with expansion, right? And
Right.
with expanding, I can't go into Singapore not understanding the culture of Singapore, but yet speaking about DEI. That's not going to work, right? But what I have learned is that there's so many ways to find out about a person's culture. You can look at their mannerisms. You can ask them certain things. People are open to sharing about themselves. And I'm not talking about personally, right? People are
Mhm.
open to sharing about their culture. You can visit classrooms. I used to believe that the best way to become an effective teacher was to go into someone else's classroom.
Yeah.
It
I
wasn't about
agree.
reading an article. It wasn't about a tweet. It wasn't about
Hmm.
looking at somebody's YouTube video. It was, let me go into this classroom because I heard that this teacher has a student who is doing poorly in my class, but they're doing exceptional work in her class. So I want to know, what is it like to sit in her class and to be that student? That way I can teach those same exact skills, but also I may learn something about myself. Maybe it was the fact that I don't say good morning all the time that hooks students. And I'm sorry, you all, my daughter's here, even though I was supposed to get some kind of help. So I'm sorry.
You do not have to be sorry. You are a mother, and this is a part of our life, and we don't have to be sorry about hearing our beautiful children in the background or right here on. If those people who are listening to the podcast don't get to see Mackenzie and her beautiful little face, but we do. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hi.
And she is the heart of what you do. So it's good that she's on here if you're okay with that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Something that really resonated with me is when you're talking about entry points. And I think that's so important to remember when we're talking about DEI, because if you've never thought about a student's entry point, then your class probably isn't reaching every student. Because so many times, and I can speak as somebody as part of the, I don't know if dominant culture is good to say, but white culture, like I've never had to wonder about my entry point because it would always felt like it was for me. And so learning that that's not the experience for other students, um, especially students of color or marginalized students, like they've struggled with that. And so that's a place to start right there. If you, and like you were saying, not to make you feel defensive, but just to reflect upon your own practices to make you a better teacher, to bring out the best in your students. And so I really appreciate that you mentioned that. Again, it seems like a simple step, but it's actually extremely important, and it will change the impact that you have with your students. So I appreciate that so much.
Oh, thank you.
um, Jaditza, we are getting close to the end of our time for our podcast, and I totally want to respect your time. I want to ask you two questions. The first is, how can people connect with you?
So I'm always on Twitter. I feel like Twitter is like Twitter is my version of WhatsApp because I'm
Mhm.
always on it. So you can find me at Twitter on at INC_YV. And I'm also on Instagram at Yaritza.V__.
All right. And I will drop all of those links in our show notes. And before we do say goodbye, and you have dropped so much wisdom, but in this moment, before we say goodbye, what is on your heart or what is on your mind that you'd like to share with our community?
So, what I want to say is that we're all leaders, regardless of where you are in your career, regardless of what you do. You can be a paraprofessional, you could be a nurse, you could be a cafeteria staff. We're all leaders. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget that it's what we do and how we do it that makes students flourish, whether it's in the classroom, in the cafeteria, when you gave them that extra loaf of bread, or when you said, baby, how you doing? I remember like the cafeteria ladies growing up used to always call everyone baby, how you doing? And that used to always make my day as well, right? So just acknowledging that students are looking to us for that added support. And it's
Mhm.
not that they're not getting it at home, because sometimes they are. It's just school is like that second place, that second home. And so we're human, we go through
Yeah.
things, but let's not forget that the students are also dependent on us to bring out that happiness and that joy in learning.
Yes.
We've been through a lot these past couple of years, and I know that some of us are depressed, some of us are already saying this school year needs to end even though it began. But for many students, our school is their safe haven. Our
Right.
school is what feeds them. Our school, for some of our schools, is what clothes them. But also, you are the ones that make it worth coming to. So you
Mhm.
have to keep that in mind. Even if your lessons are not sticking, something has them still coming back to your classroom. So take that, and then from there, grow that seed and figure out how you can best support those students.
Wow, that is powerful and getting me a little bit choked up. And I just want to say and add to that, like, even when students are in our building, they may not be in our classroom. We are still that extra layer of support. If we make eye contact with them, they are in our sphere, and we give them a comfort level, whether they can come to us or not. And I just appreciate everything that you shared right then. Whew, bringing us back to what really matters. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jadisa, and thank you for everybody who is listening. This has been just really important. And I can't wait for this to drop and everybody to hear it, because it brings us all back to why education matters in the first place, and how we are changing with the times to support our students so that they are also able to thrive in where they are. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you again. And please, we don't have to stop this conversation. Join our Spaces EDU educator community and we'll keep talking. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.